Hello and welcome back to Level Up Rugby. Today we're going to be talking about an additional piece of equipment that isn't a necessity when it comes to goal kicking but can be incredibly useful in your training. We're going to be talking about kicking into nets. Following on from the previous video on kicking balls and the importance of understanding the detail of the differences between all balls that can vary the results of your kick, we finished off by suggesting kicking into nets as a way of overcoming this variance between your balls in your training. And this is the first key benefit of kicking into nets. Do make sure you go and check out the previous video to fully understand the details of what can vary between balls, but essentially we came to the conclusion that every ball in some way is different. Whether it be because of its looks, personality or age, no two balls are ever exactly the same. So therefore we need to understand that, like every other aspect of our process other than our kicking tee, the ball is a variable aspect that can affect the result of your kick outside of your control. Ideally, in your training, you want to be focusing purely on your technique, as we'll be getting onto in the second key in a little bit more detail. So to have this additional variance that you have no control over is a real inconvenience. You want to know whether you struck the ball well because of your technique, not because the last ball was better than the one before it. So how can we overcome this variance between balls? Well, like we said, we can kick the ball, chase after it, bring it back and kick it again. Or we can not let that ball travel so far by kicking it into a net. So this is the first key positive of kicking into nets. It allows you to reduce the number of uncontrollable variables in your process, so you have a true diagnosis and representation of how well you completed your process and struck the ball. This will allow you to analyse only yourself. You'll no longer be able to blame the ball for your variance or inconsistency between your last strike and the one before it, because you'll be constantly kicking the exact same ball off the exact same tee. The only difference that could possibly occur could come in your process. The second, and by far the biggest, benefit of kicking into nets is that it changes your focus and your determinants for a successful kick. You now shift from a successful outcome being the ball going between the posts to completing your process correctly. You shift from being outcome oriented to process oriented. Just because the ball goes between the posts does not mean that you had perfect technique and form and completed your process accurately. You can have poor form, completely fail your process and still have a successful outcome of the ball going between the posts. But in my opinion, in your training at least, this is not a successful outcome. Of course, in games, all that matters is that you land the conversion and get the ball between the posts. Not really how you do it. You don't get any extra points for style. However, in your training, your focus should be on drilling your process to be as optimal and repeatable, therefore consistent as possible. As we'll get onto in more detail in phase 4, when we take a deeper look into some kicking philosophy, a saying that I was told a long time ago states that practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. If you continually practice poor technique and form, you'll just become consistently good at being bad. Just going out and kicking the ball with no detailed understanding of your purpose and what you're trying to achieve is a waste of time and is actually counterproductive. You could be the hardest working, most dedicated kicker in the world, but if you are consistently practicing poor, not optimal technique, building bad muscle memory, but then continuing to do so because the ball goes between the posts most times, it can be incredibly counterproductive and will lead to you just being better at being worse. Does a sprinter go out and train by just running as fast as they can over and over again? At an elementary level, maybe, but if they want to compete at a higher level, their training is not just about running as fast as they can, but more so about understanding the details of how to run fast, the technique, then trying to drill that perfect, optimal, efficient technique into their muscle memory through repetition, practicing it perfectly every time. It's not just about working hard, but about working smart. The ball flying between the posts should be a side effect as a result of you completing your process perfectly. So bring your focus back to your process. Don't let the posts distract you. Make your determinants for a successful kick, whether you complete the checklist of your process fully and accurately. First, you must understand the detail of your process so you can self-analyze, critique, and build your own individual process, which is what we're trying to help you do here at Level Up Rugby. But once you have built it, molded it, and understood your process, you should be looking to master it, trying to get as close to that ideal process that you've created every time you put boot to ball. How close you get to that ideal process that you've created and built should determine whether the outcome of the kick was a success or not in your training, not solely whether the ball went between the posts. Yes, the ball going between the posts can be a useful indication of how good your process is and how well you completed it, but sometimes it can lie to you and taint your view of how well you are actually performing. I know for sure there have been countless times where I felt I struck the ball awfully and was so far off from completing what I deemed to be an ideal good process. But the ball still went between the posts. That's okay when in games, because at the end of the day and the game, that's all that matters, that the ball went between the posts and you got the 2 or 3 points. But if you want to increase the probability of the ball going between the posts more consistently and from more places on the pitch, you need to fully understand the detail of your process so you can purposefully drill it and ingrain it into your muscle memory so it becomes second nature. Rather than continually drilling and ingraining poor, imperfect technique because the ball still went over, you should bring your focus to practicing the perfect technique or getting as close to the ideal technique as possible every time you kick the ball, drilling it into your muscle memory. So in your training, bring your focus back to your process. Don't let the ball going between the posts taint your view of whether you kick the ball well or not. Get into a net and let the determinants for a successful outcome be whether you completed your ideal process perfectly, not just whether the ball went between the posts or not. And I can guarantee you will see improved results and increased consistency when it comes to the real important outcome in games. Once you make this shift from being outcome oriented to process oriented, you'll start to recognize your faults and the things you need to improve on. Just make that shift from being outcome oriented to process oriented in your training. Really try and understand the details of everything we're talking about in phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 of your goal kicking. I'll see you next time.